select.
That's all of them.
In the name of Hades.
Got more of them than I did, huh?
Over the past decade, we have seen a massive explosion in the roguelite genre. What started as niche indie hits has even made its way into the AAA space. The roguelite is an interesting genre that hinges on the concept of repetition. It asks the player to get increasingly familiar with its systems and eventually figure out how to best exploit it. This usually takes a very specific form. Players engage in a moment of core gameplay, whether that's playing cards, rolling slots, or surviving combat, and then are presented with choices to alter their build. This often means entering a shop or a loot room, where gameplay is temporarily shifted completely to strategic decision making to alter the gameplay moving forward. Your agency as a player is strictly limited by the game's geography. You do not buy new upgrades while actively fighting a boss, and enemies will rarely harass you while you're in the shop. It's a clean and reliable design pattern that ensures the game remains balanced. But what happens if the developer removes these walls and lets these phases bleed into one another? Nola Games answered this question with Noita, a roguelite that takes these rigid structures and drops it into a highly volatile systemic world. To better understand how Noita changes the rules, we have to look at how it handles synergy. In a standard roguelite, synergies are curated by the developer. If you pick up item A and item B, the game's code recognizes that combination and triggers a specific pre-designed outcome. Noita doesn't use hard-coded synergies. Instead, it relies on universal laws. The game is built on a custom engine based on cellular automata. Put simply, every single pixel on this screen is physically simulated and possesses its own material properties. Fire naturally ignites oil. Oil burns away, creating smoke. Smoke rises to the ceiling and displaces oxygen. The developers didn't script this specific encounter, rather they specified defined rules for each physics item and let them interact. This systemic design completely shatters the compartmentalize loop. Because the environment is an active, reactive participant, the entire world becomes the combat zone, the puzzle, and the shop all at once. If the player needs a way to safely cross a hazard, waiting for a hazard immunity upgrade in a safe room is a solution, but it's one that relies entirely on luck. Instead, due to the systemic design, the player is able to manipulate the raw materials that are readily available to build their own solution on the fly. Between every biome, Noita drops the player into the Holy Mountain. This area has a shop, it offers healing, and it's the only place you can safely edit your weapons. At first glance, this is the exact textbook safe room that other roguelites use to enforce structure. And for a new player, it functionally works like one. You make your choices, you leave, the door locks behind you, and you're forced to engage in the next combat phase. But here is where Noita's design philosophy shines. In traditional games, developers use invisible walls or hard-coded triggers to keep you on the intended path. Noita doesn't use invisible barriers. It just uses highly durable brickwork. Once the player begins to understand the systems and attempts to abuse them, the systemic design really begins to shine. As players realize that the Holy Mountain is subject to the exact same universal laws as the rest of the game, the illusion begins to crumble. You can teleport past the collapse trigger, you can polymorph into a sheep so the game doesn't recognize that the player left. Or you can just drill through the walls. The developers fully expect you to break their structural pacing, provided you understand the systems well enough to do it. This demand for systemic understanding extends to the game's combat. Rarely does the Noita offer the player pre-made solutions. Rather, everything is presented in pieces, and it is the player who must understand these tools in order to build something that offers them a fighting chance. Wand crafting is essentially a series of logic gates. You aren't just equipping items, you are dealing with varying metrics, with each spell determining the exact cast delay, mana recharge rate, and spell wrapping sequence. Then calculating how these spells will interact together. This shifts the burden of power entirely onto the player. In most games, finding a high-tier weapon is a reward usually tied to some form of randomness. In Noita, finding complex wands with the perfect pattern of spells is incredibly rare. Instead, spells are organized at random, often in a highly volatile way that will instantly kill the player if fed without being altered first. The roguelite genre is largely built on meta progression. You'll play, you'll die, and you'll collect some form of currency, and your character will mathematically get stronger for the next run. Noita completely rejects this. The character you play on your very first run is exactly the same stats-wise as the character you will play on your 500th. The only thing that has leveled up is your working knowledge of the game's engine. By trusting the player with a deep, uncurated simulation, Noita proves that you don't always need rigid phases or developer-crafted synergies to make a compelling roguelite. Instead of asking the player to memorize patterns, it asks them to act like scientists, testing hypotheses against a volatile world. It's a masterclass in emergent game design, reminding us that sometimes the most rewarding progression system is simply learning how the world works, and the friends that we made along the way.